welcome back everybody to On the Ball, the video podcast series from the Vanderbilt Sports and Society Initiative. My name is Andrew Maraniss, and today we have Tom Lee and Matt Holt with us to talk about sports gambling, sports wagering, some of the societal impact of that, what Tom has done here in the state of Tennessee as far as regulation of this booming business, and what Matt and his company are doing to prevent fraud in the business. And Matt, I actually saw you on a required video that all of us here in the Vanderbilt Athletic Department were, had to watch, and about a 30-minute video, very educational on, the reasons why we're not allowed to participate in sports betting. And that's how I found your name. Tom and I have known each other for years. I know he's a huge Baltimore Orioles fan. I was not let down by your everything behind you here in the screen, Tom. But Tom is a partner with Nelson Mullins here in Nashville as an attorney, and was also just spent 4 years as the vice chair of the Tennessee Sports Wagering Council. Matt is the president and founder of US Integrity. So guys, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew.
Matt, I'll start with you. For those people out there they're not thinking about this issue every day, but it seems about 4 or 5 years ago, everything changed. If you live in a state like Tennessee, all of a sudden you began to be bombarded with billboards, TV advertisements, radio sponsorships, all about sports betting, which growing up or in the old days used to be something you had to go to Vegas for. For those who aren't familiar, what changed? Why did sports betting become legal in so many states around the country?
So May 14, 2018, PASPA got repealed, and sports betting collided, and they will never be pulled apart again. We have too much data and too much studies that show that people that make a wager or have some type of risk on an event are 20 times more likely to watch that event than someone who doesn't have any risk or any stake involved in that event. So we know that sports betting is the ultimate engagement tool. It's the ultimate way to bring in new fans, to bring in and connect people to those events and hope that they have a wonderful time and enjoy all of it. But we have to ensure that they do it responsibly. And sports betting always sort of mirrored and replicated the financial services world. Even the language of the employees involved, traders and risk managers, everything's almost the exact same terminology and language we would use in financial service. So it makes sense that, like the financial services world, we would need some independent organization to analyze data in real time, identify abnormalities, investigate those abnormalities, and inevitably take those bad actors out of the ecosystem. That's what we try to do at US Integrity. At the end of the day, there is $103 billion legally wagered last year in 2022. And when we think of how we got there in 2018, when PASPA was repealed, there was $6.5 billion legally wagered in the United States. So we've gone from $6.5 billion to $103 billion, to on pace for around between 140 and 150 billion legally wagered this year. And that's still without Florida, California, Texas. So again, when done responsibly, I think what we've proven out over the last 5 years is sports betting can be the ultimate engagement tool for organizations, but has to be done responsibly with the proper oversight.
So, Tom, when Tennessee was considering whether to allow this here, what were the pros and cons that were weighed? Was it a no-brainer? This would be legalized here with some regulation on it. What were those discussions like?
Well, the door had been cracked open a little bit in 2016 with the statute authorizing fantasy sports in Tennessee, and that statute has some interesting language in it. It is typical of fantasy sports statutes all over the country, and it is premised on the skill and knowledge of the players being the thing that would distinguish fantasy sports from gambling. Many of the companies who are active now, in fact, the two largest operators of online or mobile sports betting around the country, were also in the forefront of the fantasy law movement around 2015, 2016. all of which was sparked by the New York Attorney General saying, I think this is gambling. And states began to realize that they had to catch up, that the market had gotten ahead, frankly, of their public policy and regulatory structures. That did not happen with sports wagering because it is so clearly different. And it is something that very few states, as Matt rightly said, had authorized prior to the Supreme Court's decision that said Congress could not prohibit states from enacting their own laws to authorize sports gambling. So when that happened in 2018, there was immediately a discussion in Tennessee. In fact, it was House Bill 1 in 2019. And to be very honest, the bill languished for a while. There were not that many people among the legislators, not that many people who were for it, not that many people who were against it either. And what happened in Tennessee that changed the landscape and got the bill through the House of Representatives principally by just a vote or two was that the sports leagues got involved, principally Major League Baseball, the PGA, and the National Hockey League formed a consortium. They hired lobbyists, and they got active in Tennessee to pass the bill. They wanted some particular language. We can do 30 minutes on that language if you like, but they got what they wanted. And that is how we got sports wagering in Tennessee. It was as unlikely, I think, if you'd asked people at the beginning of the year, is this going to happen? I think most people would have said, no, probably not, but it did. And so here we are. Sports wagering in Tennessee has taken off just like it has nationally. We now have had over $6 billion wagered in Tennessee since sports wagering began here in late 2021 with the first licensees. So people have taken to it. Tennessee is not a top 10 state yet by any means, probably won't be given the size of the state, but it's well within the top 20 in terms of wagering around the country right now.
Okay, one question, follow up for you, Tom, before I come back to you, Matt. So $6 billion wagered in Tennessee. How much of that money stays in the state, or is there any value to Tennesseans that money is wagered by Tennesseans?
So there are privilege taxes paid, and there are also license fees paid. So the operators, FanDuel, DraftKings, BetMGM, Caesars, and the other licensees, they pay $750,000 a year to the state. That money principally funds the operations of the Sports Wagering Council and its staff. There's always leftover, and that money goes to the general fund. But the privilege tax, which right now is 1.85% of all money wagered in sports wagering terms, that's the handle. So 1.85% of all revenue received from gamblers, from bettors, is going in Tennessee, goes to the state of Tennessee, and that money is divided up three ways. Some of it goes most of it goes, in fact, to the state's education fund that's operated by the state lottery. So most of it pays for scholarships for higher ed. Some money is returned to local governments that they are to use on infrastructure projects. And then a very small amount, frankly, too small for my taste, 5% goes to the Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services for purposes of promoting treatment and awareness of treatment alternatives for problem gaming.
Okay. Matt, earlier you said that, this sports wagering is like the ultimate marketing tool, and that, people watch more when they have some, skin in the game. Is that why we saw these leagues band together in states like Tennessee to push for something like gambling, which otherwise doesn't seem to be in the best interest of their fans? I think the video that we watched where you were the narrator, you said sports betting is hard. Nobody makes any money at it anyway, so, why would leagues be pushing for something that's bad for their fans?
Well, at the end of the day, like any type of entertainment, there's a disposable income amount that people get poured toward entertainment. But when we look through the history of the last 20 years using AGA and other studies, we know that there's been a fairly consistent amount of gambling done within each state. And whether it's legal or not, this gambling was taking place, has been, was, and would continue to take place. The problem was we had no transparency, we had no oversight, and no one was sharing in those profits that was staying here. All this money was going offshore or to illegal bookmakers. So by legalizing and regulating, suddenly we had transparency, we had oversight. We're able to actually implement a system of integrity protocols that got bad actors out of the ecosystem, allowed states to share in taxable revenue that they can use for their own projects, and then leagues to participate in ways with data, corporate partnerships, sponsorship opportunities. So I think everybody flourished here, and we've gotten better oversight than we've ever had prior.
Okay. And Tom, I think about this as a parent, and so in terms of bad actors being eliminated, maybe if my son Charlie someday was placing a bet, there's not a bookie maybe that's going to break his kneecaps or something. But on the other hand, he's exposed to hundreds of these ads as we watch the World Series or as we watch pro football on the weekends. And it seems like it's just normalizing this activity to an extent that it's like this is what you're supposed to do if you're a sports fan. I want him to watch these games for the sport of it, not the gambling of it. What sort of concerns do you have about that, and what is the state doing to counteract that messaging, especially to young people?
Well, I'm a parent too, and my concern begins with the reality that I think Matt is speaking to, which is there are, on your phone, there are right now offshore operators that will take your money and will frankly give you a better return for your money because they're not paying taxes in this country and to the federal government or states. They're not regulated by anybody, and so they're attractive and they're out there. And whether it's Five Dimes or Bovada or any number of others, you take a big risk if you put your money with those folks, for sure. But people do. So one of the, I think, goals of regulating sports gaming is to repatriate those dollars and frankly the tax revenue that can come with it, and to diminish the markets for illegal offshore operators. Excuse me. So that is one. I think what we were very concerned about on the Sports Wagering Council, what I'm very concerned about is making sure that only lawful folks are playing. So we've asked companies to do a lot to make sure that they know their customers, that we don't have people under age 21 who are involved in this. We know that happens. The NCAA has done studies to show us the prevalence of gaming on college campuses right now. It is a significant problem. I wrote an article about that last week on that very subject, because I think states frankly need to be doing more where we know that there is underage gaming occurring. And then, I think just in general, what this ought to be doing is it ought to be forcing out into the open a conversation about gaming that frankly has been underground for far too long. I mean, the idea, there still are people who will take your cash and maybe break your kneecaps if you don't pay off your gambling debts. But they're fewer and farther between. The real issue is, I think, can we have open conversations about what is responsible, maybe what should be off limits for some people? Gambling addiction is a serious problem. It is one that is probably misunderstood. I think we don't yet have resources in Tennessee that we need because frankly, the scale of gaming that we find ourselves engaging in now has come so fast, so much that we don't have resources yet in place in the state that we need to treat folks and to help people understand what they're doing. I will say this: there was some irony. The NHL suspended a player last week for 41 games, half the season. The gambling-related conduct that led to the suspension has not been described, but it must be serious. And not just, casting a wager even on his own team, which I think the league has said that's not what happened. But the team for whom he plays is sponsored by a gaming operator. And photographs circulated pretty widely the day after he was suspended, where the name of the gaming operator was on the helmet that the player was wearing on the ice. So I think that's a piece too that we've got to figure out. Is it appropriate for a gaming operator to have a banner ad on the scoreboard at Neyland Stadium, at Tennessee State, at the University of Memphis? One thing we did do in Tennessee is we prohibited wagers on college athletes by way of proposition bets. So you can't bet whether a guy from UT is going to carry the ball X number of times for Y number of yards. But there's still a lot, I think, that we have to figure out by way of public policy. And my hope is that regulators in Tennessee and other states will continue to work with companies like Matt's and frankly just do their own work to strike that balance. I think what we've done so far is we've opened up the fire hydrants, and now we've got to figure out maybe how to modulate that a little bit so that we're having the right kind of conversations, but we're also protecting people who frankly need protection.
Mm-hmm. Oh, there's a lot there I would love to follow up on. We could go for hours on this conversation. Matt, I wanted to ask you, Tom alluded to this idea of prohibited bettors. Here you have a case of a hockey player who's, not supposed to be gambling on his sport or other sports. But I know that's something that your company assists teams and leagues with monitoring. Can you talk about that issue specifically, but then also the other services that you provide to these teams and leagues, and also the gambling entities themselves, to make sure that there's nothing unusual taking place, and how you alert them, how you discover that, and how you alert them?
Sure. So prohibited bettor has actually been in the regs of the very first states post repeal of PASPA to go legal. So when we think, the first 4 states after May 14, 2018, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Mississippi, all had prohibited language. Almost every state with legal sports betting has some type of prohibited language. And what it normally says in very layman's words is if you play, coach, officiate, or are a person of influence, which we've sort of deemed over the last few years to mean a permanent employee with locker room access who travels with the team, then you can't bet on that sport. You can't bet on the sport you play, coach, officiate, or are part of the locker room in, for very obvious reasons. The problem was, how do you know who's a player, a coach, or an official of those sports? There was no practical capabilities to know. And the expectation that professional or collegiate sports leagues were going to hand over lists, including all this personal data and PII, just didn't make any sense, especially in a public framework. So what we built and launched this year was a product called ProAbet, in which we put an app on the servers of every college and professional league, team, school, conference, where they upload their own list of players, coaches, trainers, equipment managers, etc. But that list lives in their server, so that there is no worry about that PII floating around to anywhere else. We do the same thing on the sportsbook side. And now when a football player at Vanderbilt tries to bet college football, it says, hey, you are prohibited from making this wager. And it doesn't allow him to make this wager, which is a better outcome than that student athlete making that wager and then someone busting him after. And now he's losing eligibility, or he's kicked out of school, and we have another prohibited bettor in the ecosystem. So the idea of that product is to prevent the wagers from actually ever taking place. And that's just one of the services we provide. Obviously, we work with almost every major professional and collegiate sports league, NFL, NBA, and MLB, NHL, UFC, PGA, NASCAR, Pac-12, Big 12, Big 10, SEC, We work with 9 of the 10 D1 football conferences, over 300 of the 363 D1 basketball schools in the country now. And we work with 93 of the 96 licensed sportsbook operators in North America. We're licensed in 40 states, Ontario and Puerto Rico as well. And we just try to be that front end alerting system. We monitor real-time odds for abnormalities. If we identify abnormalities, they get sent to an analyst for further investigation. Monitor real-time betting data for abnormalities or suspicious behavior. When those are identified by the system, they're sent to analysts for further investigation. And then we take any reports from licensed operators that they see of suspicious wagering activity. Again, aggregate the information we have and hand it over to the appropriate state regulatory or investigative agency. So we're sort of the front line of defense, as well as that early aggregator of information, so that when that stuff is handed over to a regulator or investigator, they really have enough information to start running it down.
Even if you have to give a hypothetical example, like what are the irregular things that pop up? I think people would just be interested to learn about that. And with the volume of betting that's going on, how does something stand out so significantly from everything else?
So we have hundreds of abnormalities identified every month. 15 to 18 of those end up being sent out as alerts to state regulators and licensed operators across the country. Of those 15 to 18, about 40% end up turning into suspensions, bans, or arrests related to nefarious sports betting activity. And that is everything from match fixing, point shaving, game manipulation, to misuse of insider information, underage or illegal betting, prohibited betting. So it's a pretty wide spectrum of things that we end up working with and identifying.
Okay. Were you involved in the Alabama baseball incident?
Certainly were. We sent out that first alert to the appropriate state regulators in Ohio to get the game pulled off the board. And then, other states also followed very quickly. Our first goal, whenever there was really suspicious abnormal wagering, especially in a situation like this where there is physical evidence turned over by the licensee, the licensed operator, is to stop the betting from all these other jurisdiction, so that this can't turn into a huge, massive multi-state scandal. And even in the short term, it was open that day. There were potential co-conspirators identified in other states as well, participating in that. So again, at the end of the day, we want to get the message out as quickly as we can that something's abnormal, discontinue that wagering, aggregate that information, hand over a robust report to the state regulatory agencies, and let them sort of take it from there.
And part of what happens at the operator side is if you have a fairly shallow market, and college baseball is a good example of, a regular season college baseball game is the kind of event that does not draw a lot of betting attention. If you all of a sudden see money coming in on one side, the operators know. They're monitoring all of their games. So if something unusual begins to occur in the market, they're aware of it almost instantaneously. And then the other thing that happens is, the operators are all trying to make sure that, frankly, they make money. So as money begins to come in on one side of a game or another, or one side of an event or another, the operators are going to adjust their odds. Well, as they do that, before they do that, they want to know that that's happening because there's just a general change of opinion in the market and not something unusual. And so that's when an operator should alert Matt's company and say, hey, all of a sudden, somebody in Cincinnati just dropped a big chunk of change on this one-off game that is on no one's radar. And I think what Matt's saying, and I think it's accurate, is there were others. It wasn't just a guy who had been brought into this, and so it's both the danger and the likelihood of being caught are present in shallow markets, and frankly, markets where you have underpaid athletes and also underpaid officials. So, for example, most states don't allow wagering on minor league baseball, or there's a very thin market for wagering on minor league baseball. That's a good thing, where you've got players who are paid very low wages and umpires who are paid very low wages. But the likelihood of 1919 happening again in baseball has been dramatically changed. I mean, at least in the 8-man out telling of the story, one of the reasons the players were so susceptible was because they were so poorly paid, and they were angry at Charlie Comiskey. Well, that problem's been solved, and the pay now for professional athletes, most of them, is such that they would not be involved in fixing or point shaving, but the dangers remain at collegiate levels. And frankly, the dangers of information moving around in these shallow markets remains, whether it's college baseball or tennis is another one that's sort of notorious for inside information moving around. And there are others. Ping pong. Some states won't allow ping pong gambling. Some do. It's very popular, by the way. I think Colorado has said it's something like their 5th or 6th most popular sport.
Really? Still.
Yeah, it's huge. It is because it happens to be on live at 1 and 2 in the morning, when there's not much else live to bet on.
And the matches are very fast.
Yeah.
Matt, one thing you mentioned in the video that I watched was, just like Tom said, the idea of throwing an entire game is maybe not going to happen as much as it once did, but the micro betting is where the danger is. I wondered if you could explain that a little bit to the listeners.
Yeah, over 80% of the match fixing issues that we've seen in the last 24 months are either on a proposition wager or a micro bet or a microcosm of the event. The first point of the first set of a tennis match, or will a player get an over-under amount of passing yards or rushing yards or points in a basketball game. Those things, and micro betting, which 2 years ago was 5 years ago was non-existent. 2 years ago was a tiny little speck of betting. Now this year, it looks like it's going to be somewhere around 3 or 4% of all bets. Includes everything from make-miss free throws, make-miss field goals. And at the end of the day, those markets on average are open for about 25 seconds. That's it. Where the time you have to make a wager before that betting market closes on, will the player make or miss the next free throw? Will he make or miss the field goal coming up? Will a batter in baseball get an out, strike out, hit a ground ball, hit a fly ball, hit a home run? You could bet on all these things in real time now. And it's certainly easier to manipulate it because you only need one individual, the individual in question, rather than an entire team. And in some cases, it's easier to convince that individual that little microcosm of the event won't actually ultimately affect the end outcome of the event. Hey, I don't care if you win by 50, but I need you to miss this free throw. I need you to strike out at this at bat. That's a much easier conversation than trying to get multiple players on a team to lose a game.
Yeah, that's fascinating to me. It seems like that's an area that's especially problematic for addiction issues too. I mean, those bets are coming so fast and furious throughout a game. I was curious also in the effect that this is having on athletes, either from how frequently are they hearing from people trying to affect their performance in a game, and how frequently are they hearing from, say, fans or gamblers after a game where they, cost them all this money, they cost them their bet. Tom, are you seeing that here in Tennessee? Are there anecdotes that illustrate either of those?
Well, sure. Go to any college football message board, go to any college football game, and listen to what the fans are saying. And you can tell that they are engaged in the game, not solely based on the score on the scoreboard. Al Michaels, doing I guess Thursday night games now, has for years barely been able to disguise his betting interests in terms of whether he's interested in the game going forward or not. But now we see fans doing that too. I went to the University of Georgia for 3 years. I still have rooting interest at the University of Georgia. And Georgia fans this year have been very grumbly, very unhappy. And it's not because they aren't winning. Of course, they're winning, and they're winning by one of the largest victory margins in the country. And they're ranked number 1, but they're not covering the spread. And as a rule, Florida was the exception this season. And so it has tempered the way people feel about their teams. I don't think that's good, actually. But that's the reality. The other thing that I think we've seen is the NCAA announced this month that they are going to begin lobbying states and asking, particularly in states where gaming statutes have not yet passed, they're going to start asking states to pass statutes to protect college athletes from harassment by gamblers or persons who have gaming interests. It could be just a bettor, and that's a concern that has to do with sort of pre-game activity and also post-game activity. Whether you're angry at somebody because the kid didn't hit the field goal, ESPN has popularized this now on their late night sports center shows with the segment they call Bad Beats, where things happened at the end of games that affected betting interest, if not the actual outcome of the game. So yeah, that is happening right now in the way people respond to sporting events, the way they interact with sports. Matt is right. There have been, over time in certain sports in particular, let's think baseball, there have been ratings declines, other indicators to suggest that maybe younger audiences are turning certain sports off. Gaming is a way to re-engage those folks, but it comes at a price, I think, in the way they think and feel about athletes and the way they think and feel about the outcome of games.
That's great. And Matt, what are you seeing from you measure so much data in this business in terms of the volume of messages that athletes, especially at the college level, might be getting to influence their performance, or, after the performance, the vitriol they might be receiving from fans, which is so much easier now with, direct messaging or social media, text messaging.
We actually started a product called Athlete Alert, just so that athletes, referees, and coaches in college could actually report harassment that they were getting due to gambling losses. And I think the easiest example I can give is this past NCAA tournament in a Sweet 16 game between TCU and Gonzaga. Gonzaga was a 3.5-point favorite up by 5 with just a second or two left to play. TCU inbounds the ball. The young man gets it around half court, just heaves it up. Just trying to throw one up before the buzzer. Well, he hit it. Well, it certainly didn't affect who won or lost the game. Gonzaga was going to win, but suddenly Gonzaga went from covering to not covering. That young man didn't miss a free throw, didn't bungle any play. He just played through the whistle, got the ball inbounded, shot a half court, and made it. Just playing. Him and his family received death threats. We got the state of Ohio to actually introduce legislation that said if you harass or criminally threaten student athletes due to gambling losses, you will be placed on an involuntarily banned list and lose your right to set up a legal sports betting account or place the legal bet within that state. And you say, well, what kind of deterrent is that? Well, if you're threatening people's families or them physically over losing a bet, you have a gambling problem. So threatening to take away their ability to gamble is a big deterrent. And I think it's a great first step, because it's not just the guy who blew the field goal, the guy that struck out late, the guy that missed a free throw. In the TCU kid's case, he just inbounded the ball and made a shot. And the other team's backers who lost because of that were mad and threatened him and his family. That's the type of behavior we need to deter.
Mm-hmm. Matt, what are you seeing in terms of women's sports and the volume of wagering on women's sports? I've seen some advocates for women's sports say this is an area that needs to increase, as a marker of equality or towards equality between men's and women's athletics, which I personally just find kind of ironic. Like we need more vice, to achieve equality. But what do you feel about that, Matt?
immense rise in the wagering of women's sports, and wagering has really helped women's sports. Last year, the women's NCAA tournament final had $28 million legally wagered on it. It may not seem like a ton of money, but prior to that game, the most money ever legally wagered on a women's basketball, collegiate or pro, was $12 million. So it showed this great buildup in that women's tournament to more and more engagement into the final. And at the end of the day, that's great. And to put it into perspective, the men's final did 245 million. So you're like, all right, the women's did about 11% of the men's, but it used to be about 1%. So if suddenly the women's finals doing 10% when it used to be 1%, that's 10 times better than it was just 5 years ago. So I think we can point to gaming numbers and engagement numbers from gaming and say, look, some of the women's sports, especially basketball, appear to be growing exponentially with the rise of legal sports betting across the country.
Mm-hmm. And Tom, we're coming up against our time here, but a final question for you. I mean, given the fact that we've talked about things like, addiction and death threats, and the fact that it's very difficult to make any money gambling on sports, balanced by maybe increased interest or attendance at games and some revenue to the state. I mean, has the introduction of sports gambling in Tennessee been a positive or a negative for residents of the state?
I think on the whole, it's a positive, but it doesn't come without its own share of negatives. And I think we could say the same about the legalization of alcohol, about people who smoke tobacco. The vices all have their downsides, and some of those downsides are destructive, and can be destructive to families and communities, and we should not minimize that. But I think on the whole, the legislature made the public policy choice to open up sports gaming in Tennessee. And so at that point, what you have to do is you have to put together the safest, most responsible game possible, and hold companies to that standard. Are we there yet? No. We just before I left, my last vote, in fact, on the Sports Wagering Council was to join my colleagues in fining one of our operators $50,000 because they ran wagers during March Madness that they shouldn't have. And so we fined them, and not nothing. And that was their first significant fine. Hopefully that's enough. But I think on the whole, getting gambling up out of the shadows is useful. And we just need to make sure that the people who have been given the opportunity to do that do so responsibly. And frankly, that individuals are responsible too. And I think what you'll see is, you'll see Tennessee begin to do more. I think you'll see Tennessee begin to ask more of colleges and universities who have these students in their charge. I think you will, especially state schools, frankly. And I think you will see the Sports Wagering Council begin to take further action. I would not be surprised if in some time in the not so very near future, very far future, we saw more money put toward treatment and connecting people with resources for help. And I certainly hope that's the case.
Mm-hmm. Well, wonderful. Tom, thank you so much. Matt, thank you. I know you guys are both leaders in this field, this industry. It's been a fascinating conversation, and hope you both have a great week. And thanks for taking the time to join us.
Thanks,
Andrew. Nice to see you again, Tom.
You too, Matt.